Great. Well, let's dive in. Welcome to Human by Design. This title is a mouthful. How SMBs build an intentional hiring process that protects trust, clarity, and team capacity. We'll get into this because even earlier in our discussions, well, what do we mean exactly by Human by Design? So we're glad you're here. Glad you want to know. So we're going to dive in. First, my name is Gary Schwalke. I'll be emceeing us here today and looking forward to diving into this conversation. But before we dive in, let's talk a little bit about Spark Hire, just to give you an idea of who we are. So Spark Hire has been around for over 13 years, and we are a provider of modular hiring software that provides one connected experience for hiring teams, really built for lean teams, that provides the ability for you to connect video interviews in order to do asynchronous screening, behavioral assessment to really get additional signal from your candidates, and then combined with an applicant tracking system. And what's unique is that it is modular in nature and that you can get one or all of these. And so we're very excited to be here today hosting today's webinar. Without further ado, let me dive into the speakers today. So I'm going to punt it over here very quickly to Josh, who is the founder and CEO of Spark Hire. You've already heard from me, and then he'll introduce our speakers today.
Hey, everyone. Josh Tolan, CEO of Spark Hire. Gary did a great job of introducing the company, so I won't be duplicative in the messaging here, but really excited to be here today. As he said, Spark Hire has been in business for over 13 years, so I've been doing this quite a while, have worked with thousands of customers and their hiring processes, and really excited to be here talking to all these great speakers we've got on the panel today. And with that, I will kick it to Jennifer, who is directly below me in the video.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Howell, and I have the absolute pleasure of serving as the Director of People and Culture at the American Marketing Association. So I guide people and culture strategy, talent acquisition, compensation, benefits, engagement, and I serve on our leadership team.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Victoria.
Hello, I'm Victoria Manley, and I'm the Talent Acquisition Coordinator for Reliable Medical. I have the privilege of really supporting my managers and our organization in building great teams. And I have a passion for recruiting and talent acquisition, and excited to be here with you today.
Well, thank you both for joining us. We're really excited. This should be a fun conversation. Two very different experiences, an unbelievable amount of experience. And so I think we're going to learn a lot today. So let's talk about what we're going to cover. So the first is really the capacity challenge. I think we'll talk about this from a small to medium business perspective, SMB. But I think those of you in large companies would say that you also feel this capacity challenge. So it's very relevant regardless of the size of the company. Then we're going to take some opportunity to dive into automating the observation to elevation so we can elevate decision making. So, we want to maintain a human experience, but at many times the capacity constraint makes that very difficult to do. And so where are the places that we can employ automation in order to have those moments when we do have the opportunity to connect as humans that much better? And then really the agility advantage. So here with an SMB perspective, one of the advantages that you have to counter some of the size and resources of the larger companies is this agility, and how do we put that to work? And then we'll, of course, provide some Q&A at the end. So I will, with that, before we dive into directly, I think what would be really helpful is tell us a little bit about, just to set the stage and provide some context for the listeners. Jennifer, we'll start with you. Just a little bit about the company, number of employees, locations, hybrid, remote, number of roles and types of roles you're looking for. I think that'll just help everybody cue in on, your experience.
Sure. So the American Marketing Association, we are a nonprofit community for marketers, whether they are students or practitioners or executives or academics. We aim to elevate the profession and deepen their knowledge. We have 5 scholarly journals, and then we have industry-leading training events and conferences that define future-focused practice. So that's what we do. We're an organization of 67 team members across 22 states. So we have been fully remote for 6 years, which provides its own wonderful privileges and some very unique challenges as well.
Yeah, that's great context. Victoria, how about you?
I work with Reliable Medical, and we supply medical equipment. We are now a nationwide organization. We have branches in probably 15 different states. Some of those are on-site positions, but I also have a lot of remote positions. So having the ability to learn more about candidates quickly is really a great plus for us, because we are also really expanding and growing quickly. So that agility you talk about is really important.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, and all that in the confines of, the practical realities of the day to day. So, Josh, why don't you kick us off with the capacity component here? Because actually, several LinkedIn posts that you had have really, I think, hit the nail on the head. Just some of the conversations we've had recently as the market rapidly evolves. So.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're all dealing with volume constraints, sameness with people using AI in their applications, which is a good thing on its own, right? Like the ability to personalize an application to the job, but it creates all these challenges down funnel, both from a volume standpoint and also from a sameness standpoint of us being able to get to know our candidates and really determine who's qualified to get to the next step of the hiring process. And especially for SMBs, which I guess context setting for everybody here, when we define SMB, a small or medium-sized business, we're referring to organizations with 500 or fewer employees. But as Gary said in the beginning, even if your organization is larger than that, it's all relative. I think the other converging force that we're all seeing is that we're all being asked to do more with less. So no matter how big your organization is, there are very real constraints on your bandwidth. And the other forces in the market that we're facing of volume because of easy apply or remote positions and all those things that create that alongside, AI optimized applications, it creates this real pressure for lean teams that are trying to get to know their candidates. So that's kind of like, I guess, setting the stage of what the market's dealing with. Curious, Jennifer, Victoria, is that what you guys are seeing at the top of your hiring process?
Victoria, I'll let you take this one first if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing that as we continue to grow, being able to meet with candidates quicker, response time is really important, and being able to have more bandwidth. I think it has really made the difference for me of spending as much time as I used to on the phone in the old-fashioned way of, phone screening my candidates, which I like that, but it made my response time much slower. And it also made it harder on the candidates because they couldn't even book with me for 2 to 3 weeks. And that just is not a good candidate experience. And it really isn't getting my hiring managers or the organization what they need and getting candidates quicker. So, we become a funnel, right? Where I, was the one that was kind of holding it up, but I didn't have any more time in my day. So, needing to go to technology to be able to free up that time and to get that candidates into the interview process quicker, was really my objective and what I needed to do.
I mean, for us, I'm the only person in my team that does talent acquisition. So I work directly with hiring managers, and then I'm the one person along with the hiring manager going through candidates. So as volume ticked up and my work continues in other areas, what I really found to be helpful is making sure that I have a very solidly designed, thoughtful process that I can rely on, that my hiring managers and my interview teams can rely on, that utilizes technology in a way as an enabler, but then also still make sure that there is kind of the human touch throughout. And that's kind of threading the needle of like, how do I, avoid scope creep and I need it yesterday and there's only so much hours in the day, and wanting to ensure that we get the right person for the right role at the right time. And so it can be really tricky. And if you're under the kind of under time constraints, there can sometimes be challenges with wanting to cut corners or wanting to amend a process to get a quicker outcome. But what we find is that when we do that, those are the folks that don't stay. And so like ultimately, what's your return on investment for your interview process and your recruiting process? Retention. And so it's, and so I think having a really well-designed process that is equal parts optimizing the tools that we have and also making sure that there's a personal touch that can hopefully work in your favor. And calibrate expectations. Like some things can't happen tomorrow. Like if you want this done thoughtfully, then you have to build that into your plan.
Yeah. And you bring up a great point. I think that's something that everybody needs to anchor on is the outcome you're after isn't to hire. It's a productive, long-standing employee that's going to add a lot of value for the organization and be aligned where the organization's also a good fit for them so that they are there for the long haul. I think, what both of you hit on and what we're talking about here are these capacity constraints that are very, very real. And oftentimes, Jennifer, in the example that you gave, teams confront those by cutting corners. So in the instance of, let's say, phone screens, like Victoria was saying, gets to a point where you're booked 2 to 3 weeks out. And so what type of experience is that for a candidate? When they have to book that far on the process, a lot of them probably might just end up dropping off because it's too far in the future for them to schedule, and other hiring processes are moving just faster. So it's not a great experience from that regard. But the other thing, and this is, where I think we get into kind of the title of this webinar here when we talk about human by design is that really a human first or human by design type of hiring process? And I think that's a thing that we're all trying to balance is we have these very real constraints on our capacity. And so if we don't do anything about it, the candidate ultimately is the one that feels a lot of the pain. And that's not because the recruiter doesn't care about delivering a good experience, but it's these constraints that they're under that lead to that experience for the candidate if nothing is done. And so when I think about it, I'm curious how you all think about just defining human by design. I think it's important for us to level set on that here for the audience. To me, it's about designing a hiring process where all candidates that are qualified can be considered for the role. All of them get a fair shot to present themselves for the opportunity. And as a business, that's what you want as well, to Jennifer's point, if we ultimately want to bring the person in that's going to be the best fit. And if we cut those corners, we kind of sell ourselves short of giving ourselves an opportunity to find that person as well. So when I think about human by design, it's not about the personal touch points, right, that everybody thinks it is. Now, that's certainly important. And ideally, we could insert ourselves at so many steps of the process to have that personal touch. But to me, it starts with really the first step, which is ensuring that all candidates can be considered and have an equal and fair shot for the opportunity. But curious how you guys think about that.
I mean, for American Marketing Association, it means that there's real intent through the entire process. How is this role going to impact the business? How is this person going to interact with other teams and external stakeholders? How can we cut through the AI slop? How can we make this challenging process underpinned by the people at AMA and what's important to us? We also think about our core competencies and interview based on those core competencies, because who you are happens well before what you do. And so, these are things that if there's no intent other than a body and a seat, that's not intent. That's reactivity. And so human by design for us means a very clear intent of what we need, who we need in this role ideally, what questions can we ask to make sure that we're determining whether or not that this is the right person, that we're clear and concise about it in the job posting so they know what to expect too. And those kind of little things, when you build them into a process and you design it into a process, it actually eliminates a lot of the grunt work, because it's just stuff that you do instead of things that you have to add.
Well, I know, Josh, for me, one of the things that you talked about, human by design and really how to define that. I think one of the things that we wrestled with was with the technology piece. Are we not having that touch point? One of our, people first and being respectful of people and certainly engaging and being, building relationships is really important to our company culture. So we kind of wrestled to say, would this be a deterrent, or would this not be a good representation of our company by, utilizing technology in this way? And really had to look at it and define it, as you said, as I looked at really the reality of a candidate experience and not being able to, be engaged quickly and really finding out, what did that mean? And I think it was really redefining that. Um, and I think that this has really been the right solution. It has been lovely to find that some of these candidates, I mean, I'm being able to reach out and get them started in the process the same day that they apply. And what's exciting about that is they remember who we are, because like you said, with Indeed, with some of these, one click or what this and that, if it's a couple weeks down the line, they forgot what they read about. But usually that first day when they're applying, they're engaged in the position, they're excited about the opportunity. And so you don't lose, that momentum, with a candidate as well. So I think it's been much more respecting of their time of, putting in an application, with us. And, the other aspect to it that I thought has been, really a good contrast for me, even though is when my phone screens, I would try to be very descriptive and I would, try and, you know, give as much of a great summary of what they were providing. It's really one-dimensional compared to what a video will provide, or having that, because they have the opportunity to fully express themselves and present themselves. And I just found that it's like, 3D, in comparison, and it's just so much richer. And again, I think that um, allows for more candidates, like you said, to be considered, that all qualified candidates. And you're able then that in that grouping, be able, as you're going through your interview process, to find the one that's going to be the best fit. And it's not restricting or, leaving others out. So I think it really does include more people to be considered.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, and it sparked I remember Alex Mosman from Knox County Schools, conversation we had a month or so ago, said, look, at the end of the day, every human being wants to be seen, heard, and respected, right? And if we think about that as the human aspect of it, and it sounds like, you both have decided to, part of the way that you'll create capacity for your organization is by utilizing asynchronous video interviews in order to help make that possible, just as you described, Victoria. And if we take it from that perspective, to your point, it's like, okay, now what are the actual advantages with those goals in mind that this additional capacity creates, right? We're more quick to respond to everyone, regardless if you're a fit or not a fit, right? And that's respecting them, right? By doing so, we're showing them that they're both seen and heard, and they get an opportunity, to your point, to tell the depth of their story that probably doesn't come across in a two-dimensional phone screen, as you described. So that's a way that probably a good segue then to the next piece, which is, okay, we've put in place some of these tools that have created this opportunity for asynchronous communication between a candidate and a recruiter, as well as hiring managers. Because to your point, not only can you respond quickly back, but you can put them in front of a hiring manager or hiring managers, plural, at the same time, right? And they can see them asynchronously. So I'm sure that's been a boon for creating capacity. How has that then helped you where those human touch points do then come in to amplify the quality of those, or how we think about where the human judgment comes into that process?
I think one of the things, there are a couple of things. One of the things that I realized is when somebody submits an asynchronous interview, I get a notification, and I started noticing that we were getting them at 8, 9 o'clock at night, or like midnight, 1 o'clock, or 6, 7 in the morning, or during the lunch hour. And so like when I started identifying these trends, I realized this is when it's best for them, not when it's best for me. And so it was allowing candidates to not have to constrain themselves into a stressful situation. The other thing that I did, which was pretty intentional, and what we're able to do is say, how much think time do you have? How many retakes do you have? Like those kinds of like components that you can build in. And one of the things that I realized was that nothing in the jobs that we do at the American Marketing Association, we're not saving lives, we're not curing cancer, we don't work in an ER. So like a thoughtful response is more helpful for us than a really quick, oh my gosh, I have 30 seconds to think of this answer, and then I can't retake. And so we gave unlimited think time. And I'll say in the intro, like, I want you to give me thoughtful responses and like really give some thought. That's why you have unlimited think time, and give them that opportunity to show up as the very best versions of themselves. Whether they choose to or not, that's them. But if we give them the space to do that, they show up, and they show up in really magnificent ways.
Great point.
Well, I think.
Go ahead.
Well, go ahead. Oh, no, I was going to say that has really been our experience as well, Jennifer. I think you articulated that beautifully in what we're seeing. And to the quality. I mean, the people that are responding and taking the time to do the videos are usually the stronger candidates, you know, and then they're able to represent themselves in a way that, you know, it's so much richer for us to get to know them so much quicker. And like you said, they can do it on their own schedule, which, you know, really does allow for a quicker turnaround time to present them in front of the hiring managers.
And just doubling back real quick. So Jennifer, one of the things that you described was the opportunity to create a thoughtful process. And I think that's one of the other major benefits of this capacity creation is it's not only that you can process more and do more volume, but it actually gives you the opportunity to work on the process instead of being drowning in it. And then you can really think about, okay, what is that balance of, you know, us getting more signal while at the same time really getting the best out of the candidate, like giving them an opportunity to shine. And, you know, maybe if you can talk a little bit about some of the things that as you had that opportunity to go back and think about that thoughtful process, what were some opportunities that were created by virtue of, you know, having some additional capacity?
I think one of the benefits of that was, so like most people who are in talent acquisition, we do an intake meeting with the hiring manager, and we say, you know, what would be really helpful for you to know about this candidate that is more that can be more observational, and build that in. So like, you know, there's so many observational aspects of a role, like, how do they show up? How do they communicate? How do they explain a situation that they've been in? How do they take themselves through a behavioral interview question? We also find that people are a very authentic version of themselves, and they'll share things that they loved about previous jobs and things that they really struggled with in previous jobs. And that's informing why this job, why us? Yeah. And so we're finding out like this more robust story of them that helps us to also sort of say, this fits. Like, or it could be, gosh, we might not be what they're looking for at all. Right. And so that can be, that's a thoughtful way to enter into the process. And then it also allows us to say, ooh, these are the things they chose to speak to us about, to tell us about. I then, during a phone screen after we put them further down in the funnel, I bring it up. And, you know, and then they're just like, hey, wait, your voice sounds familiar. And I'm like, yeah, it was me asking the questions. And like, so it's sort of like, it's reiterating, no, we're a human process and we're a small organization. Like there's only so many people that do this. So yes, I'm going to be holding your hand through the whole process. And this is all really meaningful to me. And if I'm showing you that it's meaningful to me, then you're going to feel valued as a candidate.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately like what we want.
Great example.
Well, I like the idea that, again, more of the thoughtful questions. I think one of the things that I'm able to do now, I always had individual, phone screen templates and ones that were position specific, but it was kind of always just that first layer, if you will. And I think here that I'm able to design questions that are a little bit more specific and richer, for each position, so that the candidate can then speak to those things as to why their experience, their skills, their passions are such a great fit for the opportunity, and they have more opportunity to really express that. And the hiring manager is able to, find those candidates easier as well. And that's already been discussed before they even get into the interview, so they can dive deeper. So I think it helps, to kind of look at being able to have a richer interview experience, through the process, because so much of the original went deeper to begin with. So I think it's, beneficial for both.
And
For
when
sure.
when you work at a small or medium-sized company, you're competing with massive organizations for candidates, right? So it's how can we can't give them all the bells and whistles that a Google could or an Amazon could, but what we can do is we can treat them like a person and not a cog in a wheel. And like, if you design a thoughtful enough process, they're going to remember that and they're going to say, yeah, Google's cool, but man, I felt seen. And that is like the feedback that I hear, because we have candidates that come from all kinds of backgrounds and they remember our process. And then once they're here, we do interview training with them and they join interview teams, and then they see behind the stage and they say, this is thoughtful all the way around. I'm like, you bet it is. Because we have to compete with other organizations for talent. And so how best do that than have us show up in the same way that we are asking them to show up?
Totally. And I think candidates can definitely feel when a process is really thoughtful, and a lot of effort has been put into the design of the interview questions and the interview team and everything that goes into it. So of course, when you get capacity and you can invest it into those areas, candidates will feel that. I also think that maybe the biggest thing that is maybe unsaid but does happen is when you get this extra capacity, it really allows you to invest in the moments that really, really matter to the candidate. And those are the things that aren't necessarily a stage in your hiring process workflow. It's really those moments in between stages. So for example, if you are doing phone screens just back to back to back for weeks on end, how are you able to show up when you're on those phone screens and give a proper evaluation of candidates when it's just like back to back to back, one blends into the next? I don't have time to even write notes down in between them. So one, like, how are you showing up in those moments? That really matters. Two, how are you getting back to those candidates, right? Like, by creating the capacity that you now have, you can actually invest in those touch points to make sure we are getting back to candidates in a respectful, thoughtful way. We might even be able to provide feedback to some candidates who ask for it. And then you think even downstage, like later in the process, when we have to get back to candidates and tell them they didn't move forward. Like, those are the moments that a candidate is going to remember about your organization. And in some cases, those candidates might also be future candidates. But even if they're not, right, you want to treat them with respect and dignity. And it's like, when you create the capacity because of things you do, whether it's tools or things you do through process, you can reinvest in those moments. And that is ultimately, I feel like, what the candidate is going to most remember about the process. Like, they'll remember it went fast. They'll remember you asked good questions, but they will really remember the recruiter who reached out with really thoughtful feedback, even if they didn't get the role. And so I think if you can free up the capacity, it allows you to invest in those things, which just reinforces this like human first, human by design type of process everybody's trying to run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and you both hit on the other benefit of, the process that you've designed is, especially in this environment, is the richness of the signal that you get about the candidate, right? Back to Josh's point about when you're just flowing through the process, it's really easy to just check the box versus actually giving them an opportunity to convey the best version of themselves and get to some level of depth. And then when you've done that, and you use, as you mentioned, they respond to a question a certain way, and then later down in the process, like, hey, I was really intrigued by that. Can we unpack that a little bit? I mean, how much more powerful to feel seen and heard than that?
Right. And it's also, for us, an async interview is the first step. And then after that, it's a phone screen with me if they've made it through. And so what I'll always do is I'll schedule my day. I mean, this is also like time management and trying to mitigate stress when you're, in HR in a small and medium-sized business. You have a lot to do. And setting that time aside at the start of my day to say, here are the people I'm phone screening today. I'm going to set aside a half hour, 35 minutes to rewatch their async. And then I have my scorecard and I type in my notes in advance and say, really loved this, would love more information on this. And so I'm taking notes as we're speaking. I'm encouraging them to, be as open as they can be with me. And it's a pretty robust conversation almost every time. But it's you have to, the design moments of the process can be very small. So it can be quite literally blocking your calendar off for like 10 minutes before an interview, blocking your calendar off for an hour in the morning and getting yourself prepped, because candidates feel it.
Yeah.
If they think that the first time that you're seeing their resume is when you are talking to them and hesitating, that is the worst thing. And so it's my job to make sure that they feel seen and heard by showing up as my most prepared version of myself, as a representative of the American Marketing Association. So building those micro moments into your process, that's the time savings that you're getting. That's where you can utilize it in a really thoughtful way that is evident to your candidates.
And Victoria mentioned this earlier. She brought up the term momentum, and I think it's a really important term to reference here. Recruiting is all about positive momentum with the candidate as you work through your process, not just from step to step, but Jennifer, as you just pointed out, in those moments, because what crushes momentum is when a candidate did some type of interview and they show up for the next type of interview and they're being asked the same questions over again. And it seems like nobody read the notes or nobody watched the videos or whatever you're actually doing in the process. Like anytime a candidate feels like you didn't put the time in, or it wasn't thoughtful, or they're being asked to repeat themselves, like that just totally crushes momentum. And so when you can create the capacity to go back into your process and examine these steps, these momentum opportunities, that's where you can really invest a lot of time, again, into the way that you communicate with your candidates, into the way that you review their interviews or review the notes, so you can show up as your best self from an interview perspective for the next round. Whatever those moments are, like think about those things that would actually matter as a candidate, or if you were a candidate, what would actually matter to you? What would be the things you would really remember about the process? And that's where you can go back and really invest that extra capacity. And then the outcome of that is not only a fast hiring process, which is obviously good for the candidate, but a process that feels fluid. And I think that's a thing, is candidates don't like the gaps because it feels like unknowns and black hole. Did they really look at this? Did they really talk to this person? Did they even watch my video interview or whatever it is? But when you can show up because you've created the capacity to show up, it makes it a lot more fluid for the candidate. And that continuity gets them like really bought in, like nodding their head. Yes, 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 I want to work for this organization. And that's really what you're after throughout the process.
I mean, people's time is valuable. It's basically it. Like, my time is valuable because I am a team member who is on a salary. Our candidates' time is valuable because they're investing time in this process. So understanding, accepting, and pointing out rightly your time is valuable. So that there's not a lack of understanding of what our process is. Here's the time frame. Here's when to expect to hear back from us. Here's when, like, and as close to that as I possibly can get of, I'm doing phone screens this weekend next. I would say expect to hear back from me by these 2 or 3 days about your candidacy moving forward. If you have questions, drop me an email. They know every step of the process, that it is not just dropping into a dark hole. And so those are also things that, from freeing up space, I'm able to intentionally provide more transparency about our process. And that's really important, because if I'm answering emails of, hey, I interviewed with you. Hey, I interviewed you with you. Hey, what timeline are we looking at? Hey, I'm still really interested. Hey, I now have a job offer somewhere else. If I'm spending all of my time responding to those emails, that could have all been avoided had I simply been transparent about the timeline at the front end. And so that's been a real time saver for me. And our candidates appreciate it too.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The transparency is huge. And I think, also Josh, the point that you brought up about killing momentum by going back and asking some of the same questions, not only is that killing momentum with the candidate, but it's also very inefficient for us, because we're asking the same questions and not getting any new signal, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the point, is I want to get to some level of depth. And so now, as you think about some of the changes and process that you've put in place, where have you seen that show up for your hiring managers, as an example, to just that point where they feel like, you know what, I actually know a lot more about this candidate at this point, and now I can go deeper on the areas where I need to explore or fill gaps or things like that?
Well, this is really, when you talked about having some extra capacity, this is really where I have found that I can be a better support to the hiring managers and helping them with their interview process. I mean, a lot of us that are in HR and in, talent acquisition, we know how to do it, but not all hiring managers, even though we have training and things like that, but they need more support many times, and what's important for them to be asking, and what are the things that are important to be reviewing with candidates, and having that layering. Many of my managers, maybe the next step would be a virtual with maybe a manager, and then from there it's going to be an area director. So helping them coordinate between that, where they're not just asking the same questions over and over, but really have something that is going deeper to each layer. And so I'm able to really be that subject matter expert, right, that's coming in and helping them build their processes in order to have a better interview. And so that's where my capacity has opened up, so that in the long run, that does give the candidate a better experience, right? Because they're not just being asked the same things. And it also is better for the hiring managers, because at the end of the day, they, as they go through the process, which is really what a well-built interview process should be, where at the end of the day, you know who your top candidate is. And I feel that that's where I've been able to really use my time to help with building our processes better.
And Jennifer, I know from a previous conversation, you used a term that really resonates with me, and exactly what Victoria is saying, which is you're a steward of the hiring process. And that's not just with your candidates, but it is also with your hiring managers. So we've talked a lot about right now of reinvesting time back into the process that impacts candidates. But I think Victoria brings up a great point, which is you are a steward of all stakeholders in the process. Candidates are one, and hiring managers and other stakeholders are other people that you need to be a steward for in the process. So really, when you can create that capacity, you can become more of an enabler and help not only you and the candidates, but also your hiring managers and downstream what their influence is on the process.
It's true. And one of the things that, when I do an intake meeting with a hiring manager, I'll say, tell me what you're looking for outside of the job description. Like, what are you really looking for? What qualities, where is there a gap on your team? Like, what quality would be really helpful to round it out? What are the 3 to 5 things that I can brag about what your team has done? Who is this person going to be working with? Like, let's make sure to include them in the interview team. Like, what competency do you want to assign this person on this other team? And so having them have a very firm say of, yeah, we've really struggled with, candidate or people in this position previously. There tends to be a little bit of a challenge with this other team. So I absolutely want to bring somebody from that team into the interview process so that we can say, all right, so what's important to you? Well, I really need somebody who can clearly and quickly communicate. Great. And so then it's sort of like we're trying to resolve issues, not just for the hiring manager, but how this person is going to interact with stakeholders internally. And then I can then say to candidates, you're going to be working really cross-functionally here. And here's how that shows up. And when they're doing a virtual interview, I prep them and I say, here's who you're meeting with. Here's how you'll work with them. Here is, kind of what they're like and how they interface and what they do here at the AMA. And so it's also providing them context as a candidate of like, why am I meeting people from this team? But again, it's like, and then building those interviews so that they're meeting with me first. I'm giving them as much information as I can, as much knowledge, as much cheerleading as I can. They're meeting with people from other teams, and then they meet with the hiring manager. And I tell them at the start, you're going to get a lot of context that a job description is not going to give you. You're going to hear from these people why this role is important. And so you're going to bring all of that knowledge into your interview with the hiring manager, and you will be your very best self.
Yeah.
And so it's like having a process that considers the candidate's experience when it matters at the end, that is worth more than gold. It's so valuable. And so if you have extra time to spend thinking about what your process looks like and where it matters, you can build these moments in that are a little bit more micro.
That is such a great point, Jennifer, because Josh has heard me say 1,000 times, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And you described exactly that, which is the capacity gives you the opportunity to not just have an intake meeting, but really help the hiring manager through that intake meeting get to what does success look like? And let's actually go to all of those areas of nuance that don't often get described that actually end up being the arbiters of success or failure. And then you can determine, great, now how do we look for that? What are the questions we need to ask? Who needs to be involved so that we can get to those attributes that are like, hey, we feel really confident in that success. So such a great example, which quick plug, we actually put together custom GPTs to help hiring managers do just that. They're entirely free. We'll include a link here somewhere, but we're pretty excited about it because I know Josh has been very adamant about that it's like anything, even as we think about what we do day to day selling software is, really taking the time up front to plan what is the objective and where do we lean in and spend our time that gets us to the output that we want.
Yeah. And I think both of you throughout this webinar have made me actually rethink. I think I want to redo on my definition of human by design hiring. I still firmly believe in the fact that, candidates deserve an opportunity to be considered. Like that is a no-brainer. But what this conversation has led me to is we also have to factor in the other humans on the other side of the process, which are the hiring managers. And the candidate and the hiring manager, those are the two stakeholders that really hiring is stressful because it's such an emotional time, right? On the one side, you have candidates that they need a job, they want a job. They also want people to like them, right? They want to feel valued and feel like they have the skills to get the opportunity that they're trying to get. On the other side, you have hiring managers who have a target to hit or have goals to hit as a team, have this anxiety about this open role, whether it's a backfill or a growth position, ultimately not having that position filled is impacting them and their team performance in some kind of way. So there's like this anxiety on both sides of the hiring process. And while the recruiter in the middle might own the KPIs around time to hire or future retention or whatever that may be, like the candidates and hiring managers have the most like emotional weight at stake in the process. And so as I think about like a human by design process, it's one where, we can, make sure that we're not only giving candidates an opportunity to be considered, but we're also, helping hiring managers run the best process they can possibly run to ensure they get the person that's going to help the success of their team. So it's like the balance of those things. And then what I think I want to transition to here, just as a quick pivot off of that, is like, you now are faced with the constraints of what we talked about in the beginning of the market today. So it's like, how do we build a human by design type of process? How do we create the capacity? What are the trade-offs we have to think about as we try to build that process? That's really like the challenge that people have to solve for. Somebody, and I won't take credit for this, but somebody shared with me recently, there was a Reddit post, and the post was a letter from 1950s, really long time ago. And it was from the director of some department at an organization. It was to a candidate that had interviewed for the organization. And it was like a handwritten letter that says something along the lines of, sorry, the position is no longer available, but we appreciate your time. As a thank you, we've enclosed a $75 check for your time, and whatever else the rest of the letter says. But I thought that was a really interesting example of investing in the moments that matter. The challenge, though, is like today is not the 1950s, and we have very different constraints. So yes, in an ideal world, we'd be able to write that handwritten letter. We'd be able to bring everybody in for coffee and talk to every candidate in person for 90 minutes as we interview them. But there are very real constraints on our time and our bandwidth just based on how fast everything moves. So with all that, and maybe this is a good segue as we kind of like outro from this webinar, I'm just curious how you thought about the balance of that, right? Like you realized, hey, we have this capacity constraint. We have to do something about it. And Victoria, you alluded to this earlier as you were considering using a one-way video interview solution. So maybe we'll start with you, is like, what were the things you were thinking about? And ultimately, how did you come to the decision that going in this direction was better than going in the other direction, or just sticking with the status quo?
And before you answer that, I want to add to that, because I was heading down the same, actually, not surprisingly, is as you were thinking about ways to solve it, to Josh's point, there are other stakeholders involved. And both of you, like, it's one thing to implement new solutions that make the current process, maybe it's an applicant tracking system or something like that. That's like, hey, this just has more bells and whistles and allows us to do these things. But we're fundamentally peel back the technology and the process doesn't really change. Mm-hmm. The introduction of asynchronous interviews is fundamentally different, right? Mm-hmm. And without having previous experience, there are probably lots of stakeholders in the room that are like, I don't know about that. Like you've even mentioned that yourself, Victoria. So as you are evaluating these things and where you're plugging in, how did you then also think about, those conversations and getting people comfortable with that, with those changes?
Well, a lot of it that were conversations that I was having with our hiring managers, is they themselves were feeling the constraints of time and not getting the candidates quick enough and things like that. So as I was doing my investigation of how best to solve those, questions. So it was something that we were engaged in conversation with the hiring managers as we went. And then as, we were finding some solutions, I was sharing what I was finding with them as I went too. And of course they, would hear my excitement, about, hey, I think we found some good ideas. And so engaging them in advance too, with letting them know that we are looking at and addressing these situations. I think one of the things that is wonderfully surprising is, again, we talked about it earlier, the agility. Right? Mm-hmm. It allows me to have that, because it really can change on the type of position I'm recruiting for, how that is. We also are in a, major growth, in our organization. I've got, new launches and de novos and things like that are happening simultaneously with the regular type of recruiting that's going on. So it's allowing me that being able to be agile in, building some processes and new that are going to be more timely for our situation. We can't remain stagnant. We can't remain doing all what we used to do when you're in that, and nor should we. I mean, that is one of the things that's wonderful about, having all these wonderful tools, is that it does allow us to do things better and to be more mindful and thoughtful about how to utilize them and be agile in how to adapt them to the different, positions or situations that we're in. And again, I can pivot quickly, which is really what I needed.
Yep.
I mean, same for us. I think the problem that we were trying to solve for was we had been using asynchronous interviewing for a while, but the constraints were that it didn't have a mobile function. And so that was something that we were really trying to solve for, because it didn't lend itself to being an inclusive option for people. And so that was the main problem that we were trying to solve for. And how do we show up as an employer in this platform in a way that's authentic, true, and not just, here's the question on the screen, now answer it. It's, can I record the questions? Do we have, can I control how much time they have to answer, how many retakes they have, how much think time they have? Can I build this in a way that's better suited for them? Can I do an intro to tell them what to expect, and then an outro thanking them for their time? Does it trigger emails to me when it's finished, so that I can move and trigger an email to them saying, thank you so much, we received it, you'll expect to hear from us in this period of time? Those were the big problems that we were trying to solve for. And for our hiring managers, it also removed I have a good feeling about this. It's when you have a video interview, hiring managers are asked to submit a scorecard on it. What did you like? What did you hear? What were your thoughts? And it removes the gut check, because we're asking for specifics. What did you hear and why did you like it? And so affinity bias can be really, really real. And it's one of the biases that is the hardest to check for, because it's something that makes you comfortable. And when you remove that and ask for specifics, you get different kinds of candidates that rise to the top. And so having this be part of our process solve for problems that we weren't even really aware of until we realized that, the people that are moving forward are a far different caliber and have different backgrounds and have different skill sets and different work experiences than we ever had before. That's fascinating. And we're better because of it.
Yeah, back to the richness of the signal. Well, you both provided great advice, because I can tell you, as we work with hundreds of people every month that are evaluating alternatives, and a lot of times they don't start the way you started, which is, what is the problem that we are seeking to solve? And what are all of the ways that we can do that? And then, Jennifer, you also hit on, and what are the non-negotiables in solving it? I need to be able to, do these things. Doesn't matter what tool I use. I need to be able to have these capabilities so that I can deliver the experience that I want to deliver. So that was just really solid advice.
And Gary, I want to bring up one thing, and then I think we should transition to a final question as we wrap up here. But I think it's about both of what you all said. And I think it's also about, weighing things against the status quo and what we're doing today. And so I think, as you evaluate, whether it's one-way video interviews or any type of solution, AI, some automated tool, whatever it is, you first start with the problem that you're trying to solve, and what your status quo is. There's not going to be any solution that there's not going to be some type of trade-off to consider when you think about implementing it. But that's where I think it goes back to the beginning. And when we talked about human by design and this definition, I think it's what you need to start with internally is be very clear on what type of process, what type of experience are you trying to deliver to candidates and hiring managers, and start there, because that's a really good anchor point as you think about some type of solution to implement that has trade-offs. It's ultimately, well, we know what the status quo is. We know what this new solution will help us do. We also know the trade-offs with that new solution, but which of these paths is going to lead us to the process and the experience that we ultimately want to deliver? And so I think that's like a really good North Star as you think through the decision-making process and think through getting stakeholders bought internally. And that's a good lens to look at things through. So I know we're short on time. I want to just wrap up with one question, and then Gary will go to next steps, outro, and all that. You know, we talked in the beginning about the sizes of your organizations. We defined SMB as, 500 or fewer employees, give or take. You guys are both in those types of organizations. For an SMB, Jennifer, you alluded to competing with larger organizations for talent. What are like the biggest wins when you create this capacity and you can really invest in the process and experience that you want to deliver? How does that help you outmaneuver, the bigger employers that you mentioned when you might be at a disadvantage in other ways just because of the size of the organization?
And as you answer that, I'm just going to put this up so people can have it.
What I hear from our candidates and from the people that we hire and the people that we don't move forward with is that they felt seen, they felt taken care of, they felt prepared, they knew what to expect, and that was rare. And so I think the fact that it's rare is telling you that human by design isn't something that is common as you would think. And so when you treat candidates well, even if you don't move forward with them in the process, if they still follow you on LinkedIn, they still apply for another role down the line, that's telling you that you're doing something right. I think one of the other signals of success in this is turnover. Like our average tenure, depending upon the team, is 3 to 8 years. Like it's wild. We generally don't, the average jump is, maybe 2 to 3 years. I keep seeing in reports everywhere. Our people stay. And when they go, we're never mad about it. We're so excited that we got to be part of their journey, but they remember how they were treated at AMA from the very start. And sometimes they come back, and because they know that they'll be treated well. And so I think those things matter. I think it matters. And so those are the big wins. And we had a former executive who was with our organization for almost a decade and then went on to a larger organization. And he said to me last year, gosh, I forgot how thoughtful we were. Like it's a whole different world when you work at XYZ Corporation. It's like, man, they don't care at all. Like it's the job. And it's like, that's okay. That's okay for some. It's just not okay for us.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say the same thing, being seen and being heard. I found for most people these days, that means much more to them. They're much more invested in companies that, want to be invested in them, right? And not just being a number, not just being, a cog in the wheel. And I think, when you are a company like ours who wants to be people first, that really, care about that relationship building, with our whole organization, with our clients, with our coworkers, it's really holistic, with what we're wanting to accomplish. And so having it, in our system as part of our interview process and allowing for that gives them that touch already of how important it is. And I'm just finding that, well, they're the right fit for our kind of company, because that's what's going to work. They're going to be happier here, so to Jennifer's point about longevity, right? They know that it's rare. And I think that more and more people are really wanting that, and we aren't really wanting people who just want a job. I mean, it is a mission. We have something that we're trying to accomplish, and we want to, have people that are invested in the mission that we're trying to accomplish. And so I think, it allows them to be able to express too how they're in alignment, with our mission. And that's exciting. I love when I get, that kind of response from candidates and learn about their passions and how that means something to them, because that's really a good fit for us, and it'll be a good fit for them. It's a win-win. It has to be both ways.
Yeah. Well, that was awesome. Jennifer, Victoria, as we expected, such a good conversation. And I mean, every time we learn something from you both. So thank you for taking the time and for sharing your wisdom and expertise and just being candid about it all for everybody. I think that's where we all learn the most, is just, look, we're all trying to figure it out, and doing it together makes it a lot more fun. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you both.
For those that had, we just had the next steps. If you are interested in learning more, go to go.sparkhire.com SHRM. You certainly would encourage you to reach out to us on LinkedIn as well. Josh in particular is easy to find, a man in demand, and Jennifer and Victoria as well. So thank you all for spending some time with us. Thank you for your time today, and we hope you found it very helpful. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.